The film opens with the sound of cicadas, wind over the salt marshes, and the faint tolling of a church bell, but beneath it, there's something else. A sound not meant for human hearing, a scream carried across the Beaufort River, rising from beneath the reeds. In 1848, Judge Silas Pembroke's plantation was one of the most respected in South Carolina. His family was called the spine of the law, his sons all bound for the bench or the pulpit. But on the night of June 19, 1848, every male in the Pembroke house was found mutilated beyond recognition, castrated, their mouths sewn shut with horsehair. The sheriff's report vanished from the county records. The coroner's notes were burned, and the single surviving witness, a house slave named Lydia, disappeared into the swamp, never to be seen again. For 170 years, the Pembroke massacre has been spoken of only in whispers. Locals call it the Beaufort Secret. Some say it was a curse, others say it was justice. What's certain is this: every 20 years the marsh gives up something new, a tooth, a buckle, a child's toy. And sometimes when the tide goes low enough, something else. A sound like breath rising through mud. Tonight, we're going to dig through that mud. We'll uncover the missing trial, the secret church court that silenced the truth, and the strange lineage of judges, pastors, and penitents who carried the Pembroke blood and its stain forward into the modern age. Because what happened in 1848 didn't end, it waited. The Beaufort County Courthouse keeps its oldest records in a brick annex, humid, airless, its walls stained by salt air. The clerk who first told me about the Pembroke case said there should have been a file, June term, 1848, State vs. Lydia, property of Judge Pembroke, but when we checked the ledger, the pages between May and July were missing, neatly cut, not torn. Someone had erased an entire trial from history. In what little remained, we found a notation, hearing moved to ecclesiastical authority. That phrase shouldn't have existed, not in 1848, not in Beaufort County. Church courts hadn't held civil power in over a century. But the Pembrokes were not merely judges. They were deacons of a private order called the Convent of Issachar, a semi-secret network of planters and clergy claiming divine right over the enslaved. The convent's philosophy was simple and monstrous. Sin could be transferred. If a master sinned, a slave could be punished in his place and thus cleanse the household. Lydia had been one of those punishments. He'd been purchased in Charleston after his previous owner's death sentence, branded on his chest with the sigil of the convent, a weeping eye inside a scale. What the Pembrokes didn't know was that Lydia could read, and he had found the family's book of balances, a hand-bound ledger of every transgression confessed and atoned for through pain, including unspeakable acts committed against enslaved children. When the murders happened, the convent called for silence. They sealed the church records, excommunicated witnesses, and reburied the victims under false names. No court, no justice, no trial, only a secret. And that secret still breathes beneath the floorboards of the old courthouse. In the attic of St. Helena's parish house, a carpenter repairing beams in 1912 found a chest sealed with pitch. Inside were water, warped pages bound in calfskin handwritten, with every line ruled in red ink. At the top of the first page, the Book of Balances, the handwriting was Judge Silas Pembroke's. Each entry paired a confession with a counterweight. One line recorded a crime, the next, a ritual meant to erase it. Theft was offset by donation, adultery by fasting, but the later pages grew darker, ink blotted, words nearly carved into the paper, phrases like atoned through the vessel, purged by blood, and the silence of the field. The entries stopped abruptly in June 1848. Local historians assumed it was another plantation ledger, a curiosity of ante-bellum theology, but something about the book unsettled even the archivists. Many refused to touch it. They said the pages felt warm, as if recently written. One night, the chest was moved to the courthouse archives, and by morning, the key had vanished. When a researcher finally photographed the pages in 1933, he noted something strange: faint fingerprints embedded in the dried ink, too small to belong to a grown man. The same hand appeared again and again, as though a child had pressed each page before the writing dried. That researcher, Edwin Marrow, never published his notes. In 1934, he was found drowned near the Beaufort marshes. His camera was recovered weeks later. The final frame shows the open book of balances, and in the corner of the image, blurred but visible, the outline of a man's hand resting on the page. The coroner ruled it an accident, but those who saw the photograph swore the hand wasn't Edwin's. Few people in Beaufort ever heard the name Convent of Issachar spoken aloud. Even the church historians avoided it, calling it a private circle of moral reformers. But the deeper you look, the more it resembles an early form of organized secrecy, a brotherhood of judges, planters, and preachers who believed sin could be weighed like gold, that suffering could balance the scales of divine justice. The convent took its name from a single verse in Genesis. Issachar is a strong donkey, crouching between two burdens. They claimed the enslaved were the burden-bearers of their master's moral debt. Their meetings were held not in churches, but in plantation attics, barns, and later the vestry of St. Helena's, where the Book of Balances was kept behind the altar. Every June, they met under oath to cleanse their households. Each member would confess privately, and a ritual of transfer would be performed symbolic according to their minutes, but the records hint otherwise. Several accounts mention a vessel chosen from among the field, whose silence sealed the rite. When Lydia arrived at Pembroke Plantation, he was meant to serve as such a vessel. Instead, something else happened, something that broke the convent's rhythm forever. Within a month of the Pembroke murders, the Convent of Issachar dissolved. No official disbanding was recorded, but its members began dying in quick succession: fever, fire, suicide. By 1850, every surviving member had fled Beaufort or vanished entirely, and yet fragments of their creed persisted. Private Bibles with strange annotations, sermons on inherited atonement, letters that closed with a symbol, the weeping eye above the scale. Some say the convent ended in 1848. Others whisper it simply changed its name. By 1861, the Pembroke estate had already decayed, shutters torn loose by coastal storms, the fields drowned in tidewater. Yet one family refused to abandon it, the last Pembroke widow, Eleanor, and her two remaining daughters. Neighbors said they saw candlelight in the windows every night, long after the war had emptied the countryside. They said Eleanor walked the halls speaking to someone unseen, reciting psalms backward. She'd claimed to have made peace with the river. Union soldiers who briefly occupied Beaufort during the war reported something strange about the Pembroke house. Despite its ruin, one room was untouched, the study of Judge Silas Pembroke. The furniture remained polished, the curtains immaculate, the walls scrubbed white. But when they pried open the floorboards, they found salt packed into the cracks, as if to keep something down. One soldier described hearing faint tapping from beneath the boards, rhythmic, deliberate. He thought it was rats. He left the next morning and never returned. After the war, a preacher from Charleston came to reclaim the house for the church. He stayed one night. His journal entry for that date reads only, "The air inside moves like breath. The name Lydia was whispered to me 3 times. No one lived there after 1869. The doors were boarded, the land auctioned." But every caretaker hired to watch the property quit within weeks, complaining of cold spots, the smell of iron, and most disturbingly the sound of someone praying in the locked study. The Beaufort Gazette stopped printing stories about the Pembrokes after 1871. The official explanation: superstition wasn't fit for a growing town. But every June, when the humidity hangs heavy and the marsh grass bends without wind, locals still say the house exhales. Beneath St. Helena's church runs a narrow tunnel of brick and clay. Most Beaufort residents don't know it exists. It was built, according to church archives, as a drainage conduit after the hurricane of 1822. But when surveyors examined it in 1919, they discovered the tunnel was far older bricks fired before the Revolution, carved with sigils that didn't match any local mason's mark. At its lowest point, the tunnel opens into a chamber cut directly into the marl. The air there tastes metallic, the walls slick with condensation. In the center sits a stone font. No water runs into it, yet it remains perpetually damp. The inscription around its rim is in Latin, ex injustitia purgatio, from injustice, purification. No official map marks this chamber, yet the earliest deacons of St. Helena's left records of a subterranean baptistry, used only once a year in June. They wrote of water that moves without source, and of voices in the clay. When workers sealed the tunnel in the 1930s, they heard that sound too, a slow, pulsing rush beneath the earth, like the beat of an enormous heart. Some said it was groundwater, others swore it spoke. Modern engineers later confirmed an underground spring runs directly beneath the church, a tributary feeding into the Beaufort River. But the flow is reversed. Water seems to move inland against gravity, vanishing under the town square. Local folklore calls it the Back River. They say it carries more than silt, that it remembers every sin confessed above it. And each generation, when the summer storms swell the marsh and the church bells ring against the thunder, that hidden current rises, bringing fragments of the past to the surface. The first hint of what the town feared most after the Pembroke tragedy came from a sermon that no one was supposed to hear. In 1874, Reverend Amos Redding, a visiting pastor from Savannah, was invited to deliver a message of reconciliation and renewal at St. Helena's. By the next morning, the pulpit stood empty, and the church records listed the service only as aborted due to illness. No illness was ever confirmed. Decades later, a single sheet surfaced in the archives of the Savannah Theological Seminary, Redding's handwritten notes. At the top, he had scrawled a line that scholars still can't fully explain. There is a river that runs backward through the soul of Beaufort. Its mouth is confession, its source, memory. Beneath that, the rest of the sermon had been neatly crossed out in black ink. Only a few phrases were legible through the scoring. The book speaks again. The sons of judgment shall drink from their own well. They built the church upon the wound. 2 weeks after his visit, Redding wrote a letter to a colleague describing a pulsing sound under the floor, like breathing. He claimed the congregation looked entranced, as though they'd heard something he hadn't spoken aloud. The letter ends abruptly with the line, "Their eyes rolled white when I said his name." No one knows what name he meant. Redding vanished later that year while traveling back to Georgia. His horse and wagon were found near the Beaufort River Bridge, lanterns still burning. The local paper called it a tragic accident, but in the parish register of 1875, beside Redding's name, someone penciled a single word in Latin, reductus. Taken back. In 1892, a flood struck Beaufort after 3 days of relentless coastal rain. The church basements filled first, then the crypt beneath St. Helena's. When volunteers entered the building after the storm, they found the floor of the baptistry covered in silt and black water. Among the wreckage lay something impossible, a small set of footprints impressed in the mud. Bare, perfectly formed, leading from the font to the far wall, and stopping, no sign of entry, no sign of exit. The footprints were too detailed to have been made by a child's weight alone. They pressed deep, as if whoever made them had stood there for hours. Yet no child was ever reported missing during the flood. Photographs taken by a local newspaperman show faint ripples spreading outward from the font, even though the water was still. He swore that as he developed the negatives, the shape of a hand appeared just beneath the surface, palm open, as if reaching upward. When he tried to show them, the plates cracked in the fixer. For years afterward, parishioners claimed to hear faint splashing beneath the hymns during baptisms. Some refused to enter the church at all. Others said they'd seen a figure reflected in the water, a young boy in rough linen, eyes closed, lips moving as though whispering the Lord's Prayer. No one could trace the origin of the rumor. Yet in the vestry ledger of 1893, beside the entry for repairs to the baptistry, someone had written 3 words in faded pencil, "The vessel returns." Today, the church keeps that page sealed under glass. Caretaker won't speak about it, but if you ask her quietly, she'll tell you that on humid nights the baptistry still ripples even when there's no one there. Every town has one person who remembers too much. In Beaufort, that person was Mrs. Adeline Croom, the county registrar from 1911 to 1942. She was the quiet type, spoke little, worked late, and kept her desk drawers locked with 3 separate keys. When she died, her successor found nearly 24 sealed envelopes in the courthouse safe, each labeled only with a date. The oldest, June 19, 1848. The newest, June 19, 1938. Each contained a single sheet of parchment-aged water, stained and stamped with the same symbol, a weeping eye balanced over a scale. Croom's handwriting was immaculate. Each sheet listed a single name, followed by the phrase "witness to transfer." Some names were local, others belonged to people long dead, buried under the ruins of old plantations. No one understood what transfer meant, but the list grew longer with every decade. In 1941, the town council demanded Croom destroy the papers. She refused. That winter, she began reporting strange things. Lamps extinguishing themselves, whispers behind the walls of the archive room. She told her assistant, "They don't like that I keep the truth alphabetized." The night before her death, the caretaker of St. Helena saw her walking through the churchyard after midnight, carrying a lantern and a small chest. When she passed beneath the steeple, the wind blew out her light. He said she didn't flinch, just kept walking toward the river. The next morning, the chest washed up in the reeds. It was empty. Inside the courthouse, her desk drawers stood open for the first time. Every file labeled June was gone, and on the blotter where she once signed her name, the ink had bled into a single word, balance. In 1953, the county began renovating the Beaufort courthouse. When the crews tore out the old coal furnace, they uncovered a narrow, bricked-up doorway behind the boiler. Inside lay a cramped storage chamber lined with metal shelving, the air thick with dust and the smell of salt. Most of what they found was ordinary: eroded ledgers, broken typewriters, damp law books, but at the back of the room sat a wooden crate marked only with the initials S.P. Inside were glass photographic plates, each wrapped in linen and labeled by date. The earliest read 1848, the latest 1938. Only one plate survived intact. When light struck it, an image emerged: the interior of the courthouse rotunda, empty except for a single chair at its center. On the chair rested an open ledger, the book of balances, and standing behind it, half blurred, was a man in a long coat whose face was hidden by glare. The county photographer who developed the image reported that, in negative, the figure's outline didn't match a human shape at all. It seemed doubled, like 2 bodies occupying the same space. He locked the plate in the evidence room. A week later, he resigned and left town. In his parting note he wrote, "The exposure length was 12 seconds. The shadow moved in 11. The plate is still catalogued as unidentified artifact #47. No one has successfully copied it. Every attempt yields a blank frame or a wash of gray light." Some archivists say the glass itself hums faintly when touched, as though holding a charge. During storms, courthouse staff claim the cellar lights flicker in rhythm with thunder, and the old door behind the boiler swells against its frame, as if something on the other side is breathing in time with the rain. By the 1960s, the Pembroke estate had long since vanished beneath vines and marsh. Only the foundation stones and a single chimney still stood, leaning toward the river like a grave mocker. When the county surveyed the property for development in 1964, workers found something buried in the old parlor, an antique clock, its face shattered but its brass gears untouched by rust. The odd part: the mechanism was still ticking. Experts said it shouldn't have been possible. No mainspring, no winding key, no power source. Yet the pendulum swung, slow and steady, marking each second like a heartbeat. When the workers carried it to the truck, the sound grew louder, echoing through the pines. The foreman, a practical man, told them to leave it behind, but one worker, a young man named Harris, couldn't resist. He took the clock home, saying he wanted a souvenir from the haunted plantation. 3 days later, his family reported strange noises. Soft rhythmic clicks coming from the walls. The clock, they said, began chiming at impossible hours: 12, 19, 2, 48, 4, 17. The same times recorded in the old court docket from 1008. 148. The night of the Pembroke killings, Harris dismantled it piece by piece, but the ticking never stopped. He buried the components in separate boxes across his property. Neighbors later claimed they could still hear it, faint and hollow, even with the windows closed. When Harris finally left Beaufort, he gave his house to his sister. She lived there until her death in 1981. The clock face was found again embedded in the chimney mortar, its hands frozen at 11:59. Now the locals call the ruin the house that keeps time. They say if you stand outside on a windless night, you can hear that single ghostly tick marking the moment before judgment. In 1972, a cartographer named Henry Caldwell arrived in Beaufort with a mission to map every tributary and hidden waterway of the Beaufort marshlands. Local fishermen warned him against it, muttering that some currents carried more than silt. Caldwell laughed it off, calling the stories marsh superstition. He began along the back river, the one said to run beneath St. Helena's Church. On his first night, he camped at a bend where the water narrowed. He recorded his first anomaly in his journal. The tide moved against the wind, and a faint vibration ran through the mud under his boots, as if the earth itself were pulsing. Over the next month, he noticed the pattern repeating. Every June, at precisely dusk, the river would swell inexplicably, forming eddies that resembled human footprints. Caldwell sketched them meticulously, labeling the drawings the vessels of balance. One evening, a storm rose, and the river's surface became black and glassy, reflecting Caldwell's boat as though it were doubled. The reflection moved independently, gesturing, pointing toward the old courthouse and then the Pembroke ruins. Caldwell wrote in his journal that he felt eyes in the current, measuring me, weighing the balance of my intent. By the end of the month, Caldwell had abandoned his map. His notes described rivers flowing backward, shadows in the marsh mist, and whispers carried on the wind, names he could not recognize. He returned home never to draw another map. The Beaufort Historical Society later acquired his journals. Today, the maps are folded, tucked away in acid-free sleeves. But sometimes, after a storm, the river seems to follow the paths he traced, bending and splitting as though obeying a hand no one can see. In 1985, St. Helena's Church underwent its first restoration in decades. The bell tower, rusted and sagging, was the focal point. The congregation expected silence during the repairs, yet on the very first morning the bell tolled without warning. One long, resonant ring, deep and hollow, followed by 6 shorter notes. No one had pulled the rope, no wind rattled the clapper. Yet every member who heard it reported the same chilling detail. The toll felt directed, measured, almost accusatory, as if marking a passage in time rather than the hour. Local lore immediately resurfaced. Older residents whispered that the sequence mirrored the deaths of the Pembroke sons in 1008, 148 6 strokes, 1 for the judge, 5 for his heirs. Technicians tried to dismantle the bell, even cutting its supports. The night before they were to remove it, a storm hit the coast. Lightning struck nearby, yet the bell tolled again, steady, deliberate. When they climbed the tower at dawn, the rope was frayed as if pulled from inside the empty belfry. A historian who examined the records wrote in his notes, "The church bell does not measure time. It measures memory, and in Beaufort, memory is a river, a pulse, a ledger we cannot close." By the early 1990s, the bell had been sealed inside the tower. Parishioners rarely enter after dusk, but travelers who camp along the Beaufort marsh report hearing it toll on windless nights, counting 6 strikes before falling silent. Some say it's a warning. Others believe it's a summons. No one dares to ring it themselves. In the late 1990s, Beaufort became home to a series of inexplicable encounters. Locals reported a figure appearing at dawn along the marsh paths, tall, thin, wearing a coat that seemed centuries old, always watching from the reeds. But what unsettled them most wasn't the figure itself, it was the whisper. Those who passed him said he spoke their full names, sometimes preceded by a date. One man recalled hearing, "Jonathan Pierce, June 19, 1008, 148. The dates corresponded with the Pembroke tragedies, with records long thought lost or destroyed. The stranger never approached anyone directly, never answered questions. He simply recited names and vanished. Witnesses claimed the whispers carried faint echoes of water, a rushing undercurrent, like the river beneath the church. Some described the scent of salt and damp mud clinging to the air around him. Others swore the shadow of his coat moved slightly independent of the man himself, as if something alive lurked beneath the fabric. A local librarian, curious about these reports, cross-referenced names he had heard. Every individual had a connection to the old Pembroke property, or to St. Helena's Church, descendants of families involved in the Convent of Issachar, or people whose ancestors had signed confessions into the Book of Balances. Researchers tried to follow him, but the figure was always gone by the time they approached. Sometimes, cameras left on tripods recorded only a ripple in the reeds or the brief outline of a hand against the fog. The stranger remains unnamed in all accounts, and every June, locals swear he returns, walking the same path, whispering the names of those who cannot remember and those who cannot forgive. At the rear of St. Helena's Church lies a small room, long sealed behind a heavy oak door. The vestry is unremarkable from the outside, paint peeling, hinges rusted, a keyhole warped by time. But parishioners and caretakers alike claim it carries an oppressive weight, as though the air itself resists entry. Records indicate the vestry was locked permanently in 1923 after a caretaker reported hearing a voice emanating from the walls. The balance is unbroken. When the church council forced the door open, they found nothing out of place. Yet every candle lit inside flickered violently, forming shadows that seemed to twist independently of the light. By the 1950s, the vestry became more than a rumor. People who dared peer through its keyhole claimed to see faint impressions on the walls, handprints pressed into plaster, letters scrawled and then erased, barely visible under the peeling paint. Sometimes an outline of a small figure appeared, crouching still. Photographs taken by one determined historian in 1967 revealed what looked like a blurred silhouette in the corner, its features unrecognizable. When the print was examined under magnification, the figure's posture suggested it was staring directly at the photographer, though he was standing at the door. A caretaker who entered in 1984 never returned the same. She described a sensation of being weighed from all sides, as though invisible hands pressed against her chest, calculating her worth against some unseen ledger. Afterward, she refused to speak of what she'd seen, only leaving a note in the church ledger. Some rooms are not meant for living eyes. Today, the vestry remains locked. A single warning sign hangs on the door, faded with age. Do not disturb what balances beneath the floor. Locals say that on humid nights, a faint light sometimes glows through the keyhole. No candle, no electricity, only the pulse of something hidden, waiting. The Beaufort marshes stretch for miles, a tangle of reeds and mudflats where the tides creep silently beneath the low, hanging Spanish moss. Locals often warn that the marsh remembers, though few understand what they mean. Those who live near, by reports seeing shapes moving beneath the fog, footprints appearing where no human has walked, and hearing whispers carried on the wind, names, dates, and fragments of sentences too old to belong to anyone alive. Scholars dismiss it as superstition, yet the stories persist. Historians who have studied the Pembroke estate note an unsettling correlation. Every strange phenomenon, every reported sighting, occurs in June, near the anniversary of the 1848 tragedy. The river channels themselves seem alive, twisting and splitting in impossible patterns. Boats moored along the shore sometimes rock as if pushed by unseen hands, and the tide can rise without warning, covering paths that should remain dry. The marsh is not only physical, it is temporal, layered with memory. People who wander its trails claim to hear echoes of voices from the past arguing, crying, or whispering names into the dark. Some say the reeds part to reveal glimpses of the old plantation house, fully intact, even though it was long abandoned and overgrown. Others swear the water reflects faces that vanish when approached, or shows shadows of figures moving just beneath the surface. One retired fisherman once confided that he saw a child standing at the edge of the water, staring silently, before vanishing into the mud. The fisherman said he felt the child's gaze follow him for days, pressing on his mind with a weight that could not be shaken. Locals take care never to enter the marsh at dusk. They say it is a place where history waits patiently, recording every misdeed, every unspoken secret, and that sometimes, if you listen closely, the marsh whispers them back. In the archives of Beaufort County, there exists a small bundle of letters, yellowed with age and tied with a faded ribbon, that no one has fully examined. They were discovered in 1978, hidden behind a false panel in the courthouse wall, alongside the remnants of Lydia's ledger. The envelopes bear no return addresses, only the scrawled signature of Silas Pembroke and dates spanning decades after his death. Scholars who tried to decipher them claim the handwriting shifts unnaturally, as if multiple people wrote the same page, layering words atop one another. The content is cryptic. Some letters read like confessions, fragments of private sermons, and lists of names of townspeople, children, and clergy with marginal notes, such as witness or balance unsettled. Others are more disturbing, speaking of events that never occurred in official records, disappearances, unmarked graves, and rituals carried out beneath the river's edge. One particularly faded letter ends abruptly in a blot of ink, as if the writer had been interrupted mid-sentence, leaving only the words, "Do not look for what sleeps in June." Those who have dared to read the letters report unease that lingers long after the pages are closed. Archivists describe cold spots in the room, sudden shadows, or whispers echoing down the hallways, sounds no one else can hear. A historian attempting to publish a study on the letters vanished without a trace in 1983. Only the ribbon remains, still tied in a tight, perfect bow, as though nothing has changed. The letters, it seems, were never meant to be read. They are warnings, confessions, and perhaps instructions. Every June, those who stumble across them claim to hear a faint rustling as if the paper itself moves, revealing the secrets the county has buried, and reminding anyone who listens that the past is never truly gone. In the main hall of the Beaufort Courthouse hangs a portrait that almost no one speaks of. It depicts Judge Silas Pembroke in full regalia, dark coat, white cravat, a stern gaze that seems to follow anyone who passes. The painting is old, oil on canvas, and the colors have faded over the decades, leaving the judge's eyes unnaturally bright, almost luminescent. Those who have lingered near it claim a subtle unease. The judge's expression seems to shift ever so slightly, his frown deepening or softening depending on the angle of light. Some say the eyes glint with knowledge they shouldn't possess, tracking movement in the hall long after anyone has left. In 1927, a janitor reported hearing a voice whispering from the frame during a storm. The words were indistinct, but they seemed to repeat the same phrase over and over. The balance is not yet kept. The janitor refused to enter the building alone for weeks afterward, leaving the portrait shrouded in a protective cloth. When the courthouse was renovated in 1974, art restorers noticed something even stranger. Beneath the layers of paint, another image appeared, faint outlines of 5 young men, standing behind the judge, their faces blurred and eyes hollow. The restorers were unsettled and refused to comment publicly. They noted only that the figure of the judge seemed to loom over them, arms crossed, as though guarding some secret too heavy to bear. Today, the portrait remains in the courthouse hall, a centerpiece of law and history. But anyone who stands too close on quiet afternoons claims to feel a chill brushing past, as though unseen hands are measuring them. Some whisper that the judge never left, that he still waits, ensuring that the ledger of Beaufort, the secrets, and the balances remain intact. The swamps surrounding Beaufort are vast, dark, and unforgiving, yet they hide more than water and reeds. Locals call a particular section the Shadowed Reach, a tangle of cypress and mangrove that seems to swallow light. Canoes disappear there. Hunters report hearing footsteps in places no one could have walked, and the water moves strangely, sometimes still, sometimes rippling without wind. It is said that on fog-laden mornings the swamp exhales a low, vibrating hum that carries faint voices. Some claim the sound is a warning, others a call. Folklore links the shadowed reach to the Pembroke estate, suggesting that whatever force Lygia unleashed in 1048 did not dissipate but retreated into the marsh, waiting. An amateur historian exploring the swamp in 1965 took photographs and claimed he saw a figure just at the edge of the water. It was tall, indistinct, and clothed in what looked like period attire, but no one else could verify the sight. He described a sensation of being measured, as if the swamp itself weighed his soul. After that day, he refused to set foot there again. The shadowed reach has a peculiar quality. It seems to remember events that occurred centuries ago. Canoe tracks vanish, old plantation ruins resurface briefly, just long enough to see through the mist. Occasionally, the faint outline of a child appears at the water's edge, staring silently, then dissolving into fog. The locals avoid it after dusk. They speak only in whispers of the swamp's memory, claiming it holds every secret, every unspoken crime, and every unbalanced ledger. They say that if you listen carefully, the reeds will murmur names, dates, and phrases from the Book of Balances, evidence that some shadows never leave, and some sins are never washed away. The Book of Balances still exists, though no one knows its exact location. Some say it is hidden beneath St. Helena's Church. Others whisper it rests in the foundations of the old Pembroke estate, buried beneath mud and marsh. Every June, when the tide is low and the wind hangs heavy with salt, locals report strange phenomena, a ledger appearing on doorsteps, pages fluttering in empty rooms, or the faint smell of aged ink in the air. Those who claim to have glimpsed it describe a book larger than a man could hold, bound in worn leather, its pages thick and yellowed. Names are written in tight, precise script, some crossed out, others annotated with cryptic symbols. Margins contain faint fingerprints as though someone, or something, still turns the pages. Some entries record confessions, others hint at rituals, disappearances, and long, forgotten punishments, all tied to the judgment of the Pembrokes and the mysterious Convent of Issachar. The book is said to open on its own, revealing different pages to different people. Witnesses speak of being drawn into its contents, feeling a weight pressing on their chest, a sense of being measured against the ledger's invisible scales. Those who linger too long claim to hear whispers, faint but urgent, telling names and dates, repeating phrases like balance unsettled, and the river remembers. Some scholars dismiss the reports as folklore, a cautionary tale of an old plantation and its sins. But others, those who have felt the chill, heard the whispers, or glimpsed the shadowed hand turning a page, insist the ledger is alive. They warn that it does not merely record the past. It preserves it, enforces it, and waits. The Book of Balances is not a relic, it is a reckoning, and as long as Beaufort exists, the ledger will remain open, measuring the living, whispering to the unseen, and ensuring that no secret, no misdeed, and no imbalance ever truly fades.